For Lesson 4, we're going to start with our vocabulary. Our first vocabulary word is assumptions. This is a noun. Things that are believed to be true or probably true, but that are not known to be true. Example, our assumptions were based on our previous experience. And a variation of this word is assumption. Economy, a noun, the process by which goods and services are bought and sold. Example, the economy depends on whether the merchants can purchase the supplies they need. And a variation on this word is economies. Launch, this is a noun, the act of beginning a major activity. Example, the owner of the soda company was planning to launch a new soda. And a variation on that word is launches. Surrender, this is a verb, to agree to stop fighting because you know that you will not win. Example, the soldiers had to surrender when they knew they couldn't win. A variation is surrendered or surrendering. This is one of the words that will be going into your glossary. Go ahead and open that up and you can jot down some ideas for surrender. Maybe to stop fighting might be something you would write down. To stop fighting, and then you can jot a quick sketch. Vulnerable, adjective, the possibility of being exposed to dangers. Example, the kitten felt vulnerable, so she climbed a tree to get away from the barking dog. Today's read aloud is titled, Another War Already? So the United States had just won independence from Great Britain about 30 years earlier. Military includes an army and a navy to protect the people of a country. The army is the part of the military that protects and fights on land. A trained member of the U.S. Army is called a soldier. The Navy is the part of the military that protects and fights on sea. A trained member of the U.S. Navy is called a sailor. Many of you probably know someone who is in the United States military. Air Force and the Marines are also branches of our military, but you'll mostly be hearing about the Army and the Navy in these lessons. So please listen carefully to learn about the U.S. Army and Navy during the War of 1812. You'll also learn about the Uss Constitution and how it got the nickname Old Ironsides. In your listening journal today, you'll be working on a quick sketch, and we'll be pausing throughout the read aloud, and you'll do a quick 30-second quick sketch showing an important fact that you just learned about in the text. What started the War of 1812? Adele asked her grandfather. Did we have a big army and navy back then? JP asked almost at the same time as his sister. Well, replied Grandfather Lafitte, the answers to both of these questions are related. To answer your question first, JP, we did not have a large army or navy back then. We had a fairly small navy and only about 4,000 soldiers. Today's army has almost 500,000 soldiers, and there are more than 200,000 sailors in the Navy today. To fight a war and have any chance of winning, the president had to find more soldiers pretty quickly. Remember, in 1812, many Americans were farmers. They used guns to hunt with and to protect their homes. President Madison asked farmers to use their guns to fight for their country. He offered them money and land if they would join. Did they? Asked Adele. Although some people were against the war, explained Grandfather Lafitte, many men were eager to join. These soldiers didn't always get the best military training, though. That's why in the beginning of the war, things did not go so well for us. Our government and military leaders were counting on the fact that the British were so busy fighting the French that they would not be able to put up much of a fight. They hoped that the British would not have a large enough army. In fact, some people expected the British to give up almost immediately. As it turned out, none of these assumptions were right. An assumption is something that is believed to be true but is not known to be true. The British did not back down. As the weeks and months went on, they came up with a three-part plan to attack us. First, they would launch an attack from the British territory in Canada and move their army into New York State. Then they would attack our coastal cities, including Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. Finally, they would try to capture New Orleans and gain control of the Mississippi River. Where did the first battles take place? Asked J.P., curious to learn more. We thought that our best chance was to attack the British in Canada, continued Grandfather Lafitte. About 3 weeks after the start of the war, an American general led a small army of militiamen into Canada. Militiamen are men who were trained to be soldiers but were not part of the army. Unfortunately, they were defeated and were forced to surrender to the British, and surrender means to give up. Other defeats in the Great Lakes area resulted in the loss of territory north and west of Ohio to the British. This also meant that settlers in neighboring Indiana were now vulnerable. Vulnerable means that there is a possibility of being exposed to dangers. And, as he had already been suspected, some Native Americans took up weapons to fight alongside the British. They thought that this might be the only way they could protect their land. Because of this war, the Native Americans suffered greatly. "Did we fight at sea as well?" asked J.P. "I was wondering that too," said Adele. "We certainly did. That was where we had some important victories," replied Grandfather Lafitte. "You mentioned the USS Constitution on your list. That ship was also known back then as Old Ironsides. In the very beginning of the war, this incredible ship defeated a British ship off the coast of Canada. Both ships fought a hard battle. At one point, the two ships were right next to each other. Cannonballs from the USS Constitution smashed into the sides of the British ship. They caused a lot of damage. And even though the British ship fired back, they did much less damage to our ship. It's said that some of their cannonballs even bounced off the side of the Constitution because its walls were so thick." "Is that how it got its nickname?" asked Adele. "What was its nickname again?" "Yes, thanks to Old Ironsides, the British were forced to surrender. It is probably safe to say that, at least in the early stages of the war, we were much more successful at sea than we were on land." "Hooray!" cheered JP and Adele together. The British were determined to ruin the U.S. trading economy and prevent us from getting supplies we needed. The economy refers to the process by which goods and services are bought and sold. So they blockaded most of the U.S. coastline. Luckily, we knew our waterways much better than the British did. Waterways are inlets and small and large rivers. We even had privateers who were able to stop many British merchant or trading ships and take their cargo. Privateers are sailors on private ships that were hired to attack and rob from other ships. "Oh, is this the part when you tell us about the pirates?" asked J.P. eagerly. "Not quite," chuckled Grandfather Lafitte. "Many of the privateers in the War of 1812 were hired by the United States government. However, it's true some of these privateers had previously been pirates. There is one privateer in particular that I'm going to tell you about later, but we haven't quite gotten to that part of the story." "Did the Americans think we would win the War of 1812? asked Adele. "We weren't sure, but we were determined not to give up," exclaimed Grandfather Lafitte. "The next year we sent our army back into Canada. We took back the town we had lost so that we could protect our territories again. This gave us hope. We had another victory later that year when our Navy defeated an entire fleet of British ships on Lake Erie. A fleet is a group of military ships run by the same leader." "Was that when we knew we would win?" asked J.P. "No, we were never completely sure that we would win," replied Grandfather. "You see, by 1814, the end of the Napoleonic Wars was in sight. That meant that the British would have more soldiers and naval ships available to spare. Now that they weren't busy fighting with France, they could turn their full attention toward the war with the United States. Of course, they were still keeping many foreign ships from entering U.S. ports," Grandfather added. "To make matters worse, they knew the United States was almost out of money." "Did the British think we would surrender?" asked J.P. "Oh, they probably did," replied Grandfather thoughtfully. "What happened next?" Adele wanted to know. Before I explain, we need to go down to the barn and take care of the horses." "Okay," exclaimed the children as they jumped up out of their chairs and off the porch. Adele grabbed her grandfather's hand and the three walked together to the barn. Grandfather still held the mysterious leather journal tightly in his other hand. Who did President Madison ask to join in the fight against the British? Which country was Britain already fighting against? Where did the first battle of the War of 1812 take place? Why did some Native Americans fight alongside the British? Why was the USS Constitution called Old Ironsides? Why did the British want to prevent the United States from getting supplies? What effect did the end of the Napoleonic Wars have on the War of 1812? In the read-aloud today, you heard the British were determined to ruin the Americans' trading economy. Say the word economy with me. Economy. Economy is the process of buying and selling goods and services. Our economy depends on being able to trade with other countries. Can you think of something that is part of the economy? What's the word we've been talking about? Economy.